In this photo, the tail fins of a fighter jet poke out from the sand in the desert. Men stand by it, or even on the heap. Some might be fooled into thinking this is the site of a crash, but it isn't. This Cold War period MiG-25 was buried in the sand on purpose. In July of 2003, following the Iraq War, the US military went searching for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Their search bore unexpected results when they located this MiG in western Baghdad. Similarly, when Australian troops captured an Iraqi airfield outside Baghdad in April, they uncovered several of the same aircraft, and even 3 MiG-25 Foxbats, which were the fastest and one of the most prized combat airplanes at the time. The American Theory. During the US invasion of Iraq, not a single plane or helicopter was put to use by Iraq's government, despite having nearly 300 at their disposal. After the fall of Baghdad in April, the US was left to wonder why, and it wasn't long before military members of the coalition, made up of Australia, the UK, the US, and Poland, began finding them buried in the sand, hidden under shrubbery, under camouflage sheets, and stationed out of sight. Some of these hidden planes were even placed next to littered aircraft scraps, which was meant to make them seem like unworthy targets for coalition bombers. As Florida Representative and Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee Porter Goss said at the time when he returned from a trip to the defeated nation, quote, "Our guys have found 30-something brand new aircraft buried in the sand to deny us access to them. These are craft we didn't know about." The US military was left to wonder why exactly Saddam Hussein had ordered to keep the aircraft on the ground hidden. The first plausible and partially propagandist explanation was that Iraq's military simply knew that it was outmatched by the US Air Force and the British Royal Air Force, since the majority of Iraq's planes were increasingly outdated Soviet MiGs, old French Mirage fighters, and a few Foxbats and MiG-29 Fulcrums. Most of these aircraft had been purchased for the Gulf War in the 90s. As for whether this aircraft could be flown again after being buried in sand with minimal protection, the matter was much debated internally. The reason why. Because Saddam Hussein had yet to be apprehended, and the order to hide the aircraft had come directly from him, it was challenging for the coalition to uncover the real rationale behind burying the planes. The US military was mistaken in believing the aircraft had been buried due to fear. It was actually part of a strategy devised by Hussein himself. As he prepared for the war in 2002, after President Bush announced his intention to intervene in the country, Hussein believed the war would be limited and brief, with him staying in power after the fact, just as he had done after the Gulf War. He did, however, question if things would be different, and the US might deploy more troops and use greater force in order to remove him, as he expressed to his commanders in a 1992 conversation, saying, quote, "They might wonder how much force they need to deploy this time to achieve what they failed to do last time." Yet he decided to follow his instincts and his philosophy of informing military decisions by past experiences. Thanks to documents retrieved after the war, it is now known that his main military concern was the possibility of an internal coup or a civilian uprising, followed by the threat posed by Iran and Israel, and in the very last place, the conflict with the coalition. Based on this line of thinking, he sought to preserve the strength of his military for upcoming fights. Strategic repetition. Saddam Hussein had already implemented the same strategy before, although that attempt was rather unsuccessful too. During the Gulf War, Iraq hid planes across the country, but they were still targeted and often destroyed by the opposing coalition. Hussein then sent aircraft to the bordering nation of Iran so they could hold them until the end of the conflict, as he knew that the coalition would not attack Iran. What Hussein wasn't counting on was Iran's unwillingness to return the 173 transport, fighter, and bomber aircraft temporarily given to them. Despite that setback, Hussein still believed that the coalition would not lay a finger on Baghdad during the invasion, since the other coalition had not touched Iran during the Gulf War. Hussein's misjudgment. Once Hussein decided to keep all aircraft grounded as his country was invaded, some of his lower-level commanders realized how much of a military misstep this move would be. Their attempts to share their personal concerns and change his mind were quickly brushed off. A significant portion of Hussein's informal power that helped him remain in control of Iraq lay in the cult of personality he had carefully crafted for the population and the military. His views and perception were often enforced onto others by those close to him. Senior ministers of Iraq mandated orthodoxy and obedience, and all officers fell in line. Added to this self-perpetuated myth of grandeur, he believed that Iraq's exceptionalism would lead them to withstand bombardment. The origin of this line of thinking can be traced back to 1991, when he expressed to his military commanders what he thought of the coalition airstrikes on Iraq after he withdrew his forces from Kuwait. Quote, Where is it written in the books to have a preparatory bombardment for 1 month and a half? Which book is it? Was it ever recorded in a war? I mean, this attack could not be measured. We should say in a decisive manner that Iraq is the master of the world when it comes to faith, mental and nervous capabilities, and human tenacity, because there has never been anything else in history. Adding to this belief was the consideration of public perception, and the fact that the U.S. gave it importance when dealing with international matters. During the Gulf War, they bombed an air raid shelter thinking it was a command post, and the public response made them keep downtown Baghdad free of airstrikes. In Hussein's mind, 2003 would play no differently. The coalition did attack and bomb Baghdad, claiming victory on April 15th, and soon after began uncovering aircraft buried in the Iraqi desert.